Good morning, everyone. When I speak at this level, can everyone hear me okay? Very good. I was giving a presentation in China, which is probably now 5-6 years ago, and the audience was about 5,000. And I wasn't sure whether they could hear me, so I asked the same question. I said, can everyone hear me okay? And there was no reply, so I spoke up a little, repeated myself a few times, no reply, until the lady who organized the talk said, Mr. Marr, they can all hear you, they just can't understand you. Which is not a great start to any presentation. I'm looking forward to the huddle later on, where we can hopefully clarify some of the things if you have any questions. What I want to do today is to give a brief overview of where I see leading edge of data science at the moment. Especially from some of the clients I'm working with at the moment, it's always great to come back to Ireland, actually. I've got a number of clients here, currently working with largest Irish companies, CRH in the construction industry, some work with the Bank of Ireland, just done a project with 3, the network company, and as well as public sector organizations like the healthcare regulator, HICWA here. So I know the Dublin quite well by now, and it's always good to come back and hopefully make some good connections here with you as well. So what I want to do is really look at what is some of the leading edge and how do we do this well, because what I see a lot is that so many organizations still get completely lost in this big tsunami, which is this big data revolution that we're experiencing. And very often they're targeting projects that are the lowest hanging fruits rather than doing it really strategically and scientifically. So for me, the 2 key messages are: we need to start with our strategy. We need to do this really strategically, figure out the really important use cases for data and analytics in your organization, linking it to some real measurable results and high performance indicators for your organization. And then when we implement this, we need to do this scientifically. In particular, using questions to drive all of this. When I did my PhD research at Cambridge University, one of the first things you learn is how do you do good research? And good research starts with formulating a question and then finding the data to help you answer the question. And what I see increasingly is that organizations being overwhelmed by all the data start with the data rather than the questions. So for me, they are the key messages that will hopefully come through. Start with strategy and figure out the questions before you do anything. A little bit of my background. As I said, I started in academia, working at Cambridge, and then Cranfield School of Management. Then 10 years ago, I left the university setting and now work for myself, helping companies do data science strategically in practice. So I work with boards of companies to really figure out what are the key use cases for big data in their organizations. I've worked with lots of big global companies, as you can see, and written a few books, and I think quite a few of you will get big data in practice today. The most recent one is called Key Business Analytics, where I try to translate some of the most important analytics tools that we see in practice and make them relevant and understandable for the general reader. So this is a book I've done for the Financial Times, where I said these are the key tools and these are the ways you can actually use them in business to apply them across all the different functions, from marketing to finance to operations. And then my new book I'm working on at the moment is called Data Strategy, which is coming out early next year. So for me, there's an evolution that we're experiencing at the moment of how we use data. And for me, flying a fighter jet is a great analogy. I've done some work with the Ministry of Defense where we designed their data science strategy, and we then cascaded this into the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And I remember sitting down with the head of the Air Force in the UK, Sir Steve Dalton and his team, to talk about their data needs and their strategic use cases for data science. And the only thing that went through my head was, how could they get me into a fighter jet one day? clearly watching Top Gun far too many times when I was a teenager. So I asked this question so many times that I think in the end they felt sorry for myself and they said, okay, you can have your fast jet flight. And I was so excited. And very naive at this point, thinking, oh, I just turn up, jump into a jet, have a great time. But then I had my invitation coming through, which said I have to have my medical to make sure I was fit enough to fly. And I said, this is probably just a little tick box exercise, that's all good. So I turned up at the air base and met the doctor, and the first thing she did is she put me on scales for the ejection seat settings. So you think, okay, this is different from me checking into Heathrow Airport. And then she was saying about the Gforces and how they will basically, when the plane experiences these Gforces, how this presses the blood into your lower body, and then you're likely to pass out if you don't compress your stomach muscles really hard to prevent the blood from going to your lower body. So at this point, I was thinking maybe I should just go home now. This is all not what I was expecting. But luckily, we had a few drinks with the station commander in the evening, and I was feeling a lot braver again. So I then turned up in the morning, met the pilot, was ready to go, and he then said, the first thing that we need to do is we need to plan our mission, because we can't just jump into a jet and fly anywhere, and it costs a lot of money, so we need to make sure there's some training value in all of this for me. So we then sat on a computer, mapped out the flight path, and he said basically, okay, we take off, I show you a few things we can do with these aircraft, and then the main purpose of this mission would be to find a bridge somewhere in the Welsh valleys, and then we would basically pretend to drop a bomb on this bridge, and then return to the base. So this made sense. So we then printed the flight path out, and you have a clear plastic pocket on your flight overall, and this is where the map goes. So when you get strapped into the plane, you always remember what this mission is all about, what the purpose and the strategy and the goal is. We then finally got strapped in, took off, and when he said to me, I'll show you a few things we can do with these aircraft, what this translated into is, I will try to make you throw up as quickly as possible. So the first 10 minutes were really tough. We basically took off, he turned the aircraft upside down, I was now looking into the sea, then you've got these G trousers on that basically prevent from the blood from going into your lower body, so your trousers start to inflate. It's all very bizarre. And I survived the first 10 minutes, so it was good. We then found the bridge, pretended to drop the bomb, and then he showed me a little bit of air-to-air combat with another aeroplane, at which point my body said, I need to really go home now, I've had enough. So I then said, please take me home. And he said, okay, let's go above the clouds. He obviously achieved his mission. And we then talked about how they basically fly these planes. And he said, I will give you control for a bit, which will make you feel a lot better. So I had now the stick in my hand, and the plane was doing what I wanted it to do, which was feeling really great, and I was feeling better. And then he said, this dashboard in front of us is what we use to fly this plane. And there are 5 key indicators that help us to understand exactly where we are in relation to where we should be. And I guess you need this, because if you fly into the clouds and you have no idea where you are, you need to have some data, some instruments that tell you where you are. The other thing that happened is he then informed mission control that he was passing control over to me. I mean, I say control, I was only holding the stick and he was doing everything else. And mission control, they do something else. They monitor the airspace around the aircraft, they make sure that there are no unidentified aircraft in the airspace, they look at weather conditions. So what you have is this really sound system of data that helps you to successfully deliver on your mission. And what I learned from this is how all of this has evolved. A few hundred years ago, planes didn't have any data. The fighter jets maybe had very limited instruments. Nowadays, they have satellite data, they have sensor data. We then returned back to the base, and I was physically completely exhausted and realized that actually we as human beings are the weakest link in all of this. So all the aircraft that are now being ordered by the Air Force are drone aircrafts. They're self-flying. And this is an image of one of the latest drones here that can completely autonomously take off, fly into a theater, identify a target, shoot a rocket to destroy the target, and then fly back to the base. And this is all done autonomously using big data algorithms and machine learning. And for me, this is where we are. This, for me, is this evolution. This drone has 20,000 sensors in one single wing. You can imagine all this data that is being generated using cameras, sensors, satellite data, and is enabling us to fly by themselves. And this, for me, shows this evolution of how we're changing in the use of data, not only to help us navigate, but also to change the way we operate our business. So for me, there are 3 strategic lenses. So when I work with an organization on their data strategy, we look at 3 things. One is, how can we use data to actually inform your decision-making? This is about what needs to go on your flight dashboard. So if you are an executive team in a company, you have a few big questions that you want to have an answer to. Google, for example, have identified about 35 high-level questions, and they say every bit of data that now goes to the board has to link to these 35 big unanswered questions because they are the strategically most important ones. And their executive chairman, Eric Schmidt, now says that this is how they're running Google. So the first one is around decision-making. The second one is about how do we use data to improve our operations. So from the past, where we flew planes by ourselves, to now drones automatically driving things. More and more companies use data in their operations, not only to improve decision-making, but to run their company differently. And the third lens is where we actually look at data as an asset. And we say, actually, if we look at this strategically, if we have a lot of data, this might make our business more valuable. Maybe we could potentially sell and monetize this business to our customers and others and make more money. And these are the 3 lenses that we look at. Sometimes companies are only interested in the decision-making element, the operations element, or the monetizing element, but I think it's really important to look at all of those. Once we've figured out what do we want to use the data for, then we need to figure out the questions we want to have an answer to, so we can then apply the scientific method of finding the right data, finding the right tools to turn the data into insights, and then inform decision-making and improve performance. So a few examples. So we are now entering the smart world where soon every thing on the planet will be smarter, have technology in it to collect and transmit data. And we see this from our smartphones. Now we're entering the wearable era where we have smart watches that collect data on us. And for the first time, I think data collection is penetrating our bodies. So I've got a wearable device that measures my heart rate, measures my activity levels, my sleep. And this is something we've never had before. And one of those companies that has really managed to leverage this is a smart nappy company, or diaper for you. So I don't know whether you've seen this, but this is a disposable nappy that has a little microchip in it. So the first evolutions of these smart nappies were pretty boring. They were basically, they would send you a tweet when your baby needs changing. I mean, I've got 3 kids, and I don't need a tweet to tell me when they need changing. But the latest evolution is fascinating because this chip takes a complete urine sample of your baby. This data is then sent to your smartphone. Your smartphone sends it to a cloud server where this data is analyzed using the latest algorithms. One algorithm that recently introduced was one that was developed in collaboration with a hospital that looks after very sick and premature babies. And what they did is they've been collecting these urine samples for years and years, and they developed an algorithm that can now predict infections about 48 hours before any physical symptoms appear. So in this setting, this very often can make the difference between life and death. If you can treat a very sick, a very premature baby 2 days before any physical symptoms appear that they have an infection. The beauty is, because these algorithms can be transferred, your smart nappy now has the same level of intelligence. So you will get feedback saying, it looks like your baby is going to develop an infection. It will also allow you to look at your hydration levels. So are you giving your baby enough liquids, at the sodium content in their diet, and so on. And this is just the very beginning of all of this. So this, for me, is where we are starting to transform our organizations, where they start to use data to really change not only the way they operate, but also what they offer to customers. We now are surrounded by all this, what we call unstructured data, and companies are starting, again, to use this and to change the way they offer their products to customers. So Google, for example, if you use Gmail, I'm sure you know that Google is analyzing and reading every single email that is sent and received via Gmail. And they do this to understand your advertising profiles. So if you've just told a friend that you're looking forward to your holiday in Singapore, and you then go on Google, they will then understand that you're looking for a holiday hotel rather than a business hotel, so they can optimize the search results. But what they're now doing is they're starting to develop algorithms that can almost suggest responses. I don't know whether you've seen this, that they're using machine learning to detect, okay, this is a friend, there's already in your contacts database, you've had lots of conversations with this person, this is the kind of style of conversation you have, either more formal or an informal style. This person then asks you, do you want to come and play soccer with me? And then you say, okay, normally you say yes to this, you have this space in your calendar available, so Google will then say, yes, hi mate, I would love to see you, I've already penciled it into my calendar. And then you can then say, I will accept to send this email out. So this is the other thing, that for me, machine learning and AI will completely transform the way we use this big data that we're now surrounded by. Is all the sensors we have. I've recently moved house and had this short window of opportunity where I was allowed to buy lots of gadgets, which was great. So I now have everything connected to the internet that you could possibly have connected to your internet in your house, from my thermostats to my fire alarms, to my TVs, to my security systems. And I love it. And ovens are great examples. The latest ovens now have sensors in them that will detect when you're burning something. But not only those sensors, but also cameras that will look at a chicken that is roasting in your oven and look at it and say, oh, this is getting a bit dark now. Maybe I should send you a message to your phone saying, looks like you're overcooking your chicken. And then you can check it out and say, oh, okay, it looks a bit dark, I better switch this oven off. And you can do this from anywhere. And again, Netamore security cameras. They are cameras that use face recognition technology, and this costs $150. So I now have security systems in my house that recognize who my friends are, who my family members are, and if anyone else turns up that the camera doesn't recognize, again, I get a note saying that there's a person in your house, do you know that person? So for me, video and photo technology and the way we can now analyze it will give us a huge push forward. Last year alone, we've taken 1 trillion photographs. In the past, this was simply unstructured data we couldn't use. They were just collections of dots of color. And unless someone put a tag on saying this is a picture of a cat, you couldn't really use it. Now we can. For a start, there's a lot of metadata on photos anyway, because most of them we take on our smartphones, and they get geotagged and time-stamped. Lots of people, again, don't know that we're sharing a lot of this information. When we share pictures on Instagram, the metadata gets shared with the data. So there was an interesting project recently where someone used a machine learning algorithm to detect cats automatically, and then used the geotag to say, and this was the street and the house where this cat lives, because simply from the geotag on the picture. But we're now getting smarter with all of this. So activity trackers, for example, the annoying bit is typing in what you've just eaten. This is not really that advanced at the moment. It tracks your activities very well, but when you have a lunch, you then have to say, I've just had a tuna sandwich, and this was probably 500 calories, unless you use the barcode scanner. What you can now do is you can take a photograph of your meal. Machine learning algorithms will look at it and say, this is a steak, this is mashed potatoes, this is vegetable, this is the size of the meal, therefore I can estimate the calorie content. Even better, if you go to any chain restaurant, it will take the geolocation from your picture and say, okay, this was taken in a Pregos restaurant in the center of Dublin. These are the menu items. This looks like this is this type of dish, and therefore it gives you very accurate calorie information. And then I'm sure you know that Facebook has invested heavily in machine learning, and their face recognition capabilities are getting better and better. Today, they're as good as your friend's ability to recognize you. But this is they're now starting to go beyond not only recognizing you anywhere on pictures on the internet and seeing who else you might know, but they've started to look at other things like shape recognition. Because we give Facebook a lot of pictures, they can theoretically identify the 10% of Facebook users who've put on the most weight over the last year. And they can sell this information and auction off to companies like Weight Watchers, saying you might want to place an ad on that person's timeline. All activities nowadays leave this digital trace that we can now use. As someone who writes books, I find it fascinating that for the first time I now have access to information of what bits of my book do people actually read? Or do they read it, or do they just pick it up and leave it on the shelf, which happens quite a lot? Or if they read it, which bits are they rereading? What other books are they reading? Which bits are they highlighting? So you now get an aggregated view of this, and I've never had that before. Or if you use streaming services like Spotify, they have access to your data. They know what music you listen to, where you are, and even how fast you're moving. So again, they're starting to use this to identify what music do you like to listen to when you are in a gym. And then if they start to link this to things like your activity trackers, and they say, okay, you're now on a spinning machine, it's high-intensity training, these are the kind of songs you like to listen to. There are some new songs have just come out. They go very well and have the same criteria, so I will start to stream them to you. And again, it's about personalizing the service. One company I've done a lot of work with is an insurance company that is now, again, using data for lots of different areas. One is to actually change the business model. In the past, we basically said we all share certain risks, and if you live in a certain area, if you're this age, if you're male or female, these are your premiums. What they're now doing is they're saying this is quite unfair, because if you're a young driver, you're normally penalized automatically, but this young driver might be a really good driver. So why don't we use an app that they run in the background that establish how good is your driving? So they're using the sensors in people's smartphones to understand how good is your driving, which then what they're now doing, so what we're trying to develop, is this completely dynamic insurance premium, where we're not only looking at how well they're driving, but how often, what roads they're using, how dangerous those roads are, what are the weather conditions, and so on and so on. And then basically you pay your insurance based on when and how well you're driving. The same insurance company is now using machine learning algorithm to look at voice data. So they're analyzing voice information, and they've figured out that if someone is lying, your pitch of voice is changing. So in their call centers that take insurance claims, they will run this analysis in the background and say, okay, this person might be lying based on their voice. So I will refer this to someone else for further investigation. And then machine learning algorithms, again, will be used to look at photographs of accidents and scenes of accidents to then say, okay, based on this profile, what are the possible injuries this person could have had? And again, if this then doesn't correlate with what people are claiming for, they would investigate this a bit further. So these are 3 great examples of where this insurance company really identified areas of where data could be used strategically to help them. And it's creating completely new businesses. I don't know whether you've heard of ShotSpotter. They are a company that has these sensors that monitor the soundscape of a city, and their algorithms can now detect gunfire, because this is quite a unique sound. And police forces subscribe to the service now, basically for the first time, and they have a number of these sensors across neighborhoods, so they can triangulate the exact location and the time when a gun has been fired. Police forces never had access to this data. So for the first time, they now have real-time information of when and where guns are being fired. And this company has recently signed a deal with GE, who produce smart streetlights. So this technology will go into every smart street light. So if Dublin is upgrading into smart street lights, this kind of technology will be available to them. One point I'm always making is that big data analytics is not just for the big guys, but for any company. And this is a family butchers that I did some work with in London. And they said, we want to become more analytical. And one of the strategic questions they had is, what is their conversion ratio? So how many people who actually walk past their shop and then stop, look at their shopping window, and then go inside and end up buying something? So what we installed there are little tracking devices that pick up our mobile phone signals, because our smartphones continuously look for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connections, and these signals can be picked up without transferring any personal data. So they just measure how many mobile phones walk past the shop, how many of them stop, and they have another device inside the shop that then says how many of them have come in. Then they look at their own transactions, till transactions to measure conversion ratios. That was really powerful. It gave them some really, really interesting insights. But when we analyzed the data, they found that between 9 and 11 o'clock at night, they had some of the biggest footfall in front of their shop. And they never realized this. And because they had some popular pubs on the same high street, at night, this bit of the street was getting really busy. They said, could we capitalize on this? Can we do something with this? So they applied for a license to open at night. They again went to Google Trends, a great analytics platform that we can all now use, and say, what are some of the big food trends at the moment? And they realized pulled pork is really in fashion. And this is almost a byproduct of what they're doing in their day-to-day business. Gives them a great profit margin. So what they're now doing is they're opening 2 hours at night, selling these chorizo and pulled pork burgers, and almost 50% of their profit is now coming from these 2 hours at night, simply by using data more intelligently. Another great example, John Deere, a Midwestern American company, very traditional. They've always used analytics very well. What they're now doing is with these intelligent farming systems that they're installing that take soil samples, that pull in weather data, this company now makes over $1 billion a year selling data. So this is this monetizing element, that when you have data, it's not only great for you internally, you can also use this. You have a session coming up later on sports analytics. This is, for me, where some of this is going. I've had the pleasure to work with some of the best football teams in the world. I've recently done some work with FC Barcelona. We tried to look at how they analyze data, and they all use a camera system called ProZone that has 16 cameras around the pitch that basically generates 25 data points per player per second. This is all analyzed. They have a 200-strong data analytics center that now codes all of these. So every single pass, every successful tackle is analyzed. And this gives them, for the first time, again, a real insight into playing styles, what players they might want to recruit, what coaches go with this. And I've done some work with Wimbledon this year, tennis championship in London. And what they did is they're using an IBM Slam Tracker system that basically measures and tracks everything that is going on the pitch. And this is put into a database. This year, for the first time, they use machine learning a company called Narrative Science that turns this data into match reports. Natural language match reports that I can't distinguish from a match report written by a sports journalist. And this is, for me, where lots of this is going. We're talking about this big gap in talent. I believe that a lot of this gap will be filled by machines who will analyze data for us and turn this into insights. At the same time, I think there's a real opportunity for us as data scientists to work with machines, because if you think about how chess, for example, has changed. In the 80s, we realized that actually people can't compete with chess computers, so we've given up. More recently, some of the chess championships have hybrid teams where machine learning algorithms and people work together. And they actually have an edge on just machines and just people. And this is where I see the future of data science, working with artificial intelligence, robots, where people really solve strategic, real-time problems driven by the key questions. And Amazon is a great example. They have recently patented a predictive, what they call participatory shipping algorithms, where they say, we are now so sure that you will buy this product in the next month that we will start shipping it towards you before you've even made a conscious decision to buy this. And if you then look at their machine learning capabilities built into their latest product, where you simply say, please, can you order some grocery for me? Can you order this book? This is all driven by machine learning and big data. And this, for me, is the future. These are my contact details. If you want to get in touch, feel free to send me an invite on LinkedIn. I find LinkedIn a fascinating way to stay in touch with people. For me, the key messages that I wanted to leave you with is the world is changing, big data is real, machine learning will transform big data. What we need to do, and this is absolutely critical, is that we start with our strategy to identify the areas of business we want to apply data to. Is it either decision-making, operational performance, or monetizing? We then need to develop these 3 data strategies for your organization, and then we have to apply the scientific method, finding out the questions, and then looking for the data and the tools to turn this data into answering your questions. Hopefully this has been useful, hopefully a little bit inspiring, gave you some ideas of what I see happening in the real world at the moment, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in the huddle. Thank you very much.